Welcome, Jackie, Madison from Phoenix. Hello, and that with 4 other people. So please keep putting in that information so we know who's in the room with you. We've also thrown up a poll, and you can move that poll around your screen. It's not if it's like standing in your way and you're like, I can't see anything anymore. You can move that around, but we'd love to know a little bit more about your experience with FSBE funded programs. So you can respond, like, tell us about your experience, and that is your first time you've ever had a FSBE funded program. Let us know that. If you've had more, you've held 1 or 2 of these in the past, great. Tell us that too. And you might be already operating one right now, and this is a new award, and we'd like to know about that too. So feel free to fill out that poll when you have a minute to do so. And again, you can take it away and to multiple screens if you have it. Oh, Caroline, congratulations on your first FSBE funded project. That's exciting. Nice, and Dakota. Again, as folks are coming on, if you can mute yourselves when you're not talking, that would be great. And you can mute from your bottom left on your Zoom. If you're not familiar with that. We have a few more minutes as people come in. We had, quite a few. We're going to have a big crowd here. So it's you have the opportunity to see some of your fellow colleagues with new awards as well, and start to get connected. It's really important in this work. I see folks are still dropping things in the chat, so continue to guys come on. Please go ahead and add your name, where you're from, and if you've got other folks in the room listening with you, because I know sometimes we do that as a group. So let us know that too. I see Patricia in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I hope you got some beautiful weather there. A little jealous. Mm-hmm. And you can have your camera on, you can have your camera off. I love seeing the faces, so I'm all about the cameras on, and I'm scrolling through now to take a look at like people that are there. So hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Kristen?
Yes.
Is this with government?
She's FSBE fund.
And we can hear,
nonprofit.
Because you can't do that with your government, right?
We can hear folks. Great. So you have to mute yourself at the bottom left, and your video can go on and off there. We have just another couple minutes before we get started.
Oh, that's Zoom. Surprised.
So remember, even if you joined by the phone, to please mute yourself. And you can do that again by using your own mute, probably on your phone is the easiest way. As people are coming on too, the other thing I want to just make sure, I think everybody's, I said earlier today, like if you haven't had a Zoom meeting yet, I don't know where you've been in the last 6 months. So I'm sure you don't need a lesson on Zoom, but just a couple of things as a reminder. You can have a gallery or speaker view. So on the top right, you can select to have just the person speaking. In this case, if you did that, you would see me on the slides. Or you can choose the gallery view, which you get to see multiple people. You can expand your gallery view by looking in that. There's a spot. You scroll around the middle or along your screen, and you can make that gallery view bigger, so you can see lots of tiles of people. If you
We'll talk about that because my next.
The bottom part of this as well to note is that you can have reactions. So bottom right, you'll see you can have a thumbs up or a clap. So that's one area where you can have make interactions for yourself, and you may be prompted for those throughout the presentation. You can also look at participants. You see bottom left, you see a list of participants. There's 120 as people are coming on. So that's where you can see other participants. You're welcome to chat with us, and we'll talk about dropping questions in that chat box going, because you'll see a chat on the bottom as well. And you can chat individually. We just want to always remind folks that we do think connecting is a great idea, but also know that those chats are never private, even so it says private chats. So just keep that in mind as you go through. The other thing that's important, again, is keeping yourself muted unless you are, prompted for a question or something comes up, so that we can keep the conversation flowing, the presentation happening. We have a lot to get through in a short period of time. So I'm just going to check the chat again. We still got a bunch of people coming in, dropping in their information. Thank you. Please continue to do so. I am actually going to stop talking now and hand this over to Chris Holloway. Chris.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Thanks everyone for joining. Before we get started today, I want to introduce Commissioner Elizabeth Darling. She is the Commissioner for the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, and she would like to make a few opening remarks before we get into the content of the presentation today. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody to the Runaway and Homeless Youth New Grantee Orientation. Congratulations to all of you on your successful applications and receiving your RHY award. As Chris said, I'm Elizabeth Darling, Commissioner for the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, and Acting Associate Commissioner for the Family and Youth Services Bureau. In fiscal year 2020, FSBE awarded 660 grants to support RHY programs. Of them, 158 were awarded to new grantees like you. Whether you're funded this year for a street outreach program or basic center program, we commend you and your teams for the support that you provide to this vulnerable population. Your programming could be the positive turning point that significantly impacts their future, putting them on a trajectory for success. We all know that young people become homeless for many reasons: a disconnection from family or relatives, a breakdown of the family unit, abuse or neglect, or just not having a safe place to call home or a safe place to go. Whatever their story, you are meeting them at one of the most challenging times in their lives. I taught middle school many decades ago, and I loved it. But I can attest to the fact, as we all can, that the teen years and into the early 20s are years fraught with uncertainty, change, growth, and challenge. And that's in the best of circumstances. So outreach services and access to counseling and shelter that you are offering is critical as these young people navigate both predictable and the unexpected crises. You will be there and you will be providing that path to optimism and resilience and hope on their journey to self-sufficiency and stability. During this 2-hour orientation, you will learn about the structure of the Family and Youth Services Bureau, or FSBE, which houses the RHY program. You'll learn about our mission and our vision and the legislation that governs our work. You'll also understand the roles of your federal project officers and grants management officers and what to expect as you implement your federal grants, including technical assistance resources, post-award activities, and outcome measures. Please use this time to take in all of the valuable information being presented to you and ask as many questions as you'd like, because your success is our success. In addition to this new grantee orientation, we'll be holding this year's RHY National Grantees Training on November 17th through the 19th in just 2 weeks, virtually. You should have received invitations to register online from the Runaway Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, or what we call RHYTTAC. We look forward to connecting with all of you again in 2 weeks. And once again, congratulations on your award, and I look forward to the great work to come. Thank you so much. Enjoy the training.
Thank you, Commissioner Darling. We appreciate you taking the time and providing the group a welcome and a congratulations. And I too want to echo congratulations. If we could move to the next slide, please. So here we are, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program fiscal year 21 new grantee orientation. That means we are in fiscal year 2021. That started October 1st of 2020. Next slide, please. So, hey, let's celebrate. We'll throw the confetti in the air. You received a grant award. You're all excited about providing services. You've got the staff ready, and now the rubber is meeting the road. It's time to get down to the work of administering a federal grant. specifically one from the Family and Youth Services Bureau for either the Basic Center program or Street Outreach Program. That is the group of attendees who received new awards in fiscal year 20. We welcome you all and look forward to all the great work that you're going to conduct and the achievements that you're going to accomplish over the next 3 years. Next slide, please. So before we go too much further, do we have the poll that we can review real quickly just to see what the composition is of the group that has joined us today? Oh, there we are. So it's pretty equal distribution across the three questions, which means that we've got a fairly large percentage of folks who are brand new to the Family and Youth Services Bureau grant funds, which is exciting. As my colleagues will no doubt tell you in a little bit, their staff, the federal project officers, are going to work with you directly in the administration of your grants. They are going to be incredibly excited to see so many new organizations that receive funding this year. Into our groups that have received money in the past or are currently funded, thanks for coming back. There's always something new in these presentations that we hope that you can pick up and that you can use as you're working with the young people as well as administering the grant funds. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for putting that poll up, Kristen. So what are we going to do today? We are going to talk about FSB, the organizational structure. We'll talk briefly about the mission and vision of the organization. We're going to give you lists of names and contact information for all of the federal project officers. And you'll get a similar list later in the presentation for the grant management officers. Those roles will be defined a little bit more in detail as we get further into the discussion. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, as well as our Runaway and Homeless Youth Final Rule. We'll talk about post-award monitoring. We have an entire program that supports you, a network that supports you. And then, as noted, we'll get into some discussion about managing your federal grants, not only from the programmatic standpoint, but we'll have a brief video from our partners in the Office of Grants Management. And then we'll end with some time for questions after the entire presentation is done. But we're also going to break periodically throughout the presentation and give you all an opportunity to ask questions about the specific section that we've just covered. So let's jump into it. Next slide, please. So the FSB overview. Go ahead and move next slide, please. We are in the Department of Health and Human Services in the Administration for Children and Families. So if these names don't ring a bell, then maybe you're not on the correct flight. Hopefully you're all here for the RHY new grantee orientation. You obviously met Commissioner Darling, who is the head of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, and she is serving as the Acting Associate Commissioner for the Family and Youth Services Bureau. For those of you who are not familiar with FSB, we have 3 separate programs that are currently supported under 2 divisions. There is going to be a change here in a little bit, but that's not taken place yet. So we've put this particular organizational chart up so that you can see the structure as it is today. And the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program falls under the Division of Adolescent Development and Support, along with our Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Program. And then our sister program in the Family Violence Prevention and Services Division is what we call FIPSA, or Family Violence Prevention and Services, and that focuses primarily on domestic violence, providing support across the country for domestic violence and intimate partner violence programs for local programs through the states. Next slide, please. So what does FSB do? The programs may seem a bit disparate when you think of them in isolation, but really what we're about is working every day to reduce the risk of homelessness, adolescent pregnancy, and domestic violence. And if you go on to the next slide, the way that we do that is fund programs and promote practices that help individuals and families, no matter what the challenges they may face, live healthy, productive, and violence-free lives. And so where these three programs seem to diverge, where they do converge, is that we're promoting healthy living, being productive, and living in a violence-free environment. Next slide, please. So federal staff, you've obviously met Commissioner Darling. Debbie Powell is our Deputy Associate Commissioner, and Dr. Risa Matthew is the Director of the Division of Adolescent Development and Support. So she is responsible for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program and the Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention Program. We have 4 program managers. This is the RHY leadership that is based here in DC, as well as across the country in 3 regional offices. And you'll see that there's contact information available for all of us. You're going to get a chance to meet Keith Wallace here in just a few moments. Aaron is going to present as well, as is Jeff Daniels. So you'll get a chance to not only see their faces, but hear their voices. And of course, if you ever have any questions and need assistance from the managers, please feel free to give us a call or contact us via email. Next slide, please. In the central office, we have 3, soon to be 4 project officers who have a range of responsibilities that are really intended to provide support to the field. So you'll see in a few minutes a list of names, the federal project officers in the regional offices. Those are all your direct first line contacts as the federal staff who are responsible for overseeing the programmatic elements of your grants. Those of us here in the central office really serve in a supportive role for a variety of different responsibilities. We are responsible for coordinating the development of the annual funding announcements for the 4 funding announcements that we release. We have oversight for our training and technical assistance, for our National Clearinghouse on Homeless Youth and Families, for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Homeless Management Information System. We deal with budget, and we work a lot with our colleagues and other federal agencies to help coordinate efforts across the federal government to address youth homelessness. And you'll see Toyin Akintoye, Gloria Watkins, and Tiana Williams are the 3 staff currently here in the central office. And we do have a new team member who will be joining us here in a couple of weeks. And I'm looking forward to his arrival. Next slide, please. So I spoke briefly about it, but I want to emphasize that the regional federal project officers really do serve as your first point of contact on all programmatic issues associated with your grant. They're going to be responsible for monitoring your implementation. They're going to review your progress reports, your financial status reports. They're going to have regular contact with you, either as an individual or potentially as a group of grantees in a region. They're going to be monitoring your progress, not only from a distance, looking at your reports, but at some point, either virtually or in person again, once we're able to start traveling and getting back out into the field, they'll be on site taking a look at the implementation of your grants. They're also going to be responsible for helping you if you have issues like change in the scope of the work of your grant, if you have budget revisions, or there are changes in key staff. For example, if you have a new director or a new authorized official that needs to be updated in the grant management system and grant solutions. They will work with you along with their colleagues in the Office of Grants Management to facilitate those changes. And more importantly, I think, is they are there as your first line of technical assistance, whether that's in person, over the phone, or through email. Certainly we have the Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center available, but we really encourage you to have an open dialogue and communication with your federal project officers, coming to them first for any issues or concerns that you may have, especially as it relates to the administration of your grant funds. Next slide, please. So these next couple of slides are they are the list of federal project officers in each of the 10 regions. We've included their contact information, their email. Hopefully by now, if you're a new grantee, you've had communication with your federal project officer. And this name, if you're in Region 1, Jessica Drazinovich, doesn't sound foreign to you, that you've actually communicated with Jessica and had an opportunity to touch base with her. Similarly, any of the regional staff that you see on here, if you have not heard from them, please make sure that you do reach out to them as soon as possible. This slide deck will be available for you, so you don't have to scramble to write down their names. Next slide, please. Most offices, most regional offices, we have 2 regional staff, and a couple of places we have 3. And right now in Region 1, Jessica is the only federal project officer. We are adding new federal project officers, or FPOs as we call them, hopefully in the coming months. So as those new staff come on, they'll be working with some of the senior staff to introduce themselves to you and start working with you in conjunction with the more senior staff. Next slide, please. All right, so that is our list of federal project officers in the regions. We'll go on to the next slide. Region 9. All right, so I'm going to talk briefly about the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program authorizing legislation. This program has been around since the mid-1970s, when the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act was first authorized. It has been reauthorized a few times since the 1974, most recently in 2018, and then there was some amendments made in 2015, and then in 2008. In each subsequent reauthorization, there's been some minor changes. So for example, and we could go to the next slide, please. In 2008, there were some significant changes that were added to include a requirement that performance measures and performance standards be developed. In 2015, Congress had made some changes to the street outreach program, specifically adding in the terms human trafficking, as well as changing some of the language associated with demonstration projects and technical assistance, again, specifically through the Justice for Victims of Act to add specific references to human trafficking. Most recently, in 2018, was the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2018, which was a basic reauthorization. That reauthorization has since lapsed at sunset, and so we are now working off the authority of annual appropriations. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act provides us authority to develop regulations, and those regulations are codified in the final rule that you'll see at the very bottom of the page. If you are, a geek who gets into legal citations, you'll note that there's a change on the RHY Act codification. It used to be 42 USC, it's now 34 USC. If you want to talk about that offline, I'll be happy to have a long dialogue with you about why that happened. But you will see these citations frequently, and we put them on the screen so that you're familiar with how it is codified in the federal code for the act itself, as well as what the federal regulations codification code is as well. And those federal regulations went into effect on October 1st, 2017. Really, they helped clarify a number of points in the law that had not been fully vetted when the act was passed, and even through the subsequent reauthorizations. And so we took the opportunity through the rulemaking process to provide some more clarity. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the law and the act have some fundamental statements that all RHY grantees are required to abide by, some program components. You're required to participate in training and technical assistance. You're required to coordinate with the National Communication System. Hopefully everyone's familiar with the National Runaway Safe Line. If not, we've got some more information at the end here. You need to develop emergency preparedness plans. If you're a shelter, in particular a basic center program, you have to be licensed. We require positive youth development, that your staff have criminal background checks, and as well as consultants, contractors, and volunteers. That's all very detailed in the funding announcement. And then that you're also providing us data through the Runaway and Homeless Youth Management Information System about the youth that you're serving, and there are specific data standards that we'll talk a little bit about later in the presentation. And finally, as part of your program, regardless of whether or not it's street outreach or transitional living, you are making referrals to appropriate entities, whether that's social services, law enforcement, vocational training, child welfare, that continuum of service providers needs to be in the loop. And we expect that all the RHY programs are going to be actively involved in that referral process. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to pause here. We'll see if there are any questions that folks may have before we pass it off to the next session.
Hey, Chris, this is Kristen with Youth Collaboratory. We do not have many questions right now other than people really interested in making sure they can have access to this information afterwards. So just letting folks know, yes, this is recorded and we'll be sharing that out so you can share it with your team. You can watch it again. We'll also make sure you have a PDF of the slides so you see all this really great content and be able to check it out and share it as you need to. In addition, while I have your attention, I realized I did not introduce myself. Kristen Trupa, Youth Collaboratory. Youth Collaboratory, just really briefly, is to let you, purpose is to harness the power of the youth services community to innovate, evaluate, and drive effective solutions that assure the safety and well-being of youth and young adults. We all want to unlock their limited potential. So we've worked with RHY providers for 30 years. And so we're super excited at the opportunity to leverage this experience to work with you all to ensure positive outcomes for young people that you're serving. And just a quick shout out to some folks on Youth Club on this training with me is Meredith, Kendon, Emily, and Georgie. So if you see their names, we're all here to support you moving forward. Thank you very much, and right back to you then, Chris.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So I am now going to pass this off to my colleague, Keith Wallace, who serves as one of the regional program managers for regions 1, 2, 3, and 6. And Keith is going to walk through the basic components of each of the Runaway and Homeless Youth programs. Mr. Wallace, the microphone is yours, sir.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Am I coming through?
You're good.
Okay.
You are.
All right. I want to let everyone know that as regional program managers, we're not just here to oversee the programs through our federal project officers. We're here to support you as well. So when you go back and look through the slide deck, you will see our contact information. And what's great is Chris Holloway, myself, Jeff Daniel, and Aaron Kelvington, we all came from experience with RHY programs. So we bring to the federal side the previous experience. So we're here to support you as well. We want to make sure youth are receiving the services that they desperately need. And we're here to make sure that you get all the help you need. RHYTTAC is also available to provide you. If you're a new grantee and not aware of it, RHYTTAC has great training opportunities and are here as well to help you be successful. Next slide. All right, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a reactions button. You can push that if you are a brand new street outreach program, never had one before, you know, what you could do is just give us a, how about a thumbs up, so we'll know how many new SOP grantees we have. All right, I want to talk about the history just briefly. As you can see from the slide, it's been funded since 1996, and in 2015, it was amended to include human trafficking. And the purpose is clear. It's to connect with runaway, homeless, and street youth and provide services with the intent to prevent abuse, exploitation, human trafficking of this very vulnerable population. Next slide. Okay, now your program must provide street-based outreach with prevention services to street youth, runaway and homeless youth, and then have a plan for addressing system-identified youth, such as child welfare, foster care, or juvenile justice. If you do encounter some of those youth, then you know the expectation is you'll make contact with those organizations for the benefit of that youth, hopefully to return them to a safe alternative living arrangement, or unfortunately, in case of juvenile justice, it may be incarceration. But at times you will run into these issues, not often, but it does happen. Next slide. Okay, for your street outreach program, your outreach must include a plan to have one-on-one contact with runaway, homeless, and street youth. Other outreach, of course, would include awareness efforts with other providers and the public and other stakeholders. Your gateway services, if you have not had an opportunity to review the funding opportunity announcement for street outreach, I would encourage you to do so, especially for those people that will be doing street outreach. It would be good to know what the expectations are. And hopefully, if there's any executive directors on the line, you will share portions of your funded application with your staff so they'll know what the expectations are, what is expected of them, what's in your logic model. So that would be very helpful to your teams and your staff. Now, the gateway services include water, food, clothing, transportation, hygiene items, and referral to other shelter programs. And then through your one-on-one street contact, you will assess the youth's need so that you can develop a safety plan, and the purpose is to reduce, harm for that youth. The crisis stabilization plan not only includes case management and permanency, but also follow-up services to ensure the youth's needs are being met after leaving the streets. Now, it is a requirement that your SOP program have access to a 24-hour shelter to refer youth who wish to leave the street. And what's even more important, if your agency doesn't operate that shelter, that your MOU or agreement with the shelter program allows your street outreach program staff access to that youth 24 hours a day to ensure they're safe and that their needs are being met. Now, service linkages are a key to success of any street outreach program and to ensure the needs of youth are met. For example, mental and physical health, substance abuse treatment, counseling, etc. And as mentioned earlier, follow-up is necessary to ensure the safety of the youth, the needs being met, and follow-up may be accomplished through a personal visit, a phone call, or even texting. It's just some manner where you can communicate with that youth and they can communicate with you. SOP programs are required to ensure their ability to identify and provide services or referrals to runaway, homeless, and street youth that have been victimized by trafficking, and that does include sex and labor trafficking. Now, an optional but very effective service is the operation of a drop-in center. And this is simply a safe place for youth to get off the street, out of the weather. They can hang out with other street youth. There's staff usually there, volunteers. Many street outreach programs that have a drop-in center, what they offer within that center is a place to get a hot meal, take a shower, to do laundry, a computer with internet access so they can check emails or to even do job searching. And it's a controlled environment, and staff are there to connect with the youth and also provide referrals for other services. Next slide, please. So we want to talk about definitions. FISB, runaway homeless youth, we have our own definition for, runaway homeless youth and eligibility. And it's very important to understand that, the youth you will be deeming eligible for our programs meet these definitions. So a street youth is a runaway or homeless youth that spends a significant time on the street or is in areas that increase the risk of abuse, exploitation, prostitution, drug, and or alcohol abuse. Now, specifically for the street outreach program, a homeless youth is less than 22 years of age, which means 0 through 21, and it's not possible for them to live in an environment with a relative or they don't have any other safe living arrangement. Now, the youth may become homeless because the family was evicted and now they're homeless, or they were kicked out of the home, or they were pushed out. A runaway youth is under 18 years of age. Now, a runaway is different than homeless in that a runaway chose to leave the home without the permission of their parent or legal guardian. Now, when you think of contact with youth, please think of it as one-on-one. Of course, it may be you have 2 or 3 street outreach workers talking with the youth on the street, but the difference is contact is that one-on-one engagement with the youth. You're doing an assessment. You're trying to build rapport and trust. You're offering gateway services with the purpose of trying to meet that youth's needs and hopefully help them leave the street for a safe place. Contact is not conducting outreach, which is still important, but outreach is more like you go to a school and you're talking to an assembly or to a classroom about your services. That's outreach. So let's be sure and keep those two separate. Next slide, please. Now, as we go into a discussion on Basic Center programs, once again at the bottom there at reactions, if you're a new Basic Center program, give us the wave, and so we'll know who all we have on the line.
Oh, that's a clap, not a wave.
Is that a clap? Okay, mine looked like a wave, but we'll take a clap. That'll be great. The BCP program began in 1974 as part of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Protection Act. And then in 1975, the first 66 programs were funded. The purpose is to provide runaway and homeless youth under the age of 18 years with shelter and care for up to 21 days. Now, a shelter should have a minimum of 4 beds, but not more than 20 beds in a single structure or building. And the reason for that is when you're working with runaway homeless youth, it's a different type of population. And if you put them in a facility where there's 100 beds, they get lost. And really what's needed at that time is very intensive trauma-informed case management and assessment to try to meet the needs of that youth. And we only have them for 21 days under our program. Now, at the end of 21 days, if you don't quite have a safe place for them to go to, we're not telling you have to kick them out of your shelter. You just can't fund them with our funding anymore. You can find alternate sources of funding to continue providing shelter care until they can be returned home if appropriate or to a safe alternative living arrangement. And the ultimate goal, once again, we want to reunite them with family. And sometimes that is possible, sometimes it's not. When it's not, a safe alternative living arrangement could be with a family member or a friend. Next slide, please. All right, it's very important that shelters be open 24 hours a day. It's not just important, it's a requirement. The shelter must be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Youth must be able to access that shelter either by walking up in self-referral, or maybe you have an agreement with local law enforcement, bring them to you, referral from family or friends or other street youth. But the key is it has to be open 24 hours a day with access to these youth. And besides shelter care and counseling, the BCPs must provide referrals for other services to meet the needs of the youth. They must coordinate with their local McKinney-Vento liaison so that they can access education. And if a BCP learns that they have a youth that ran from a juvenile justice institution or from a foster home, once again, you must have a plan in place to contact the proper authorities to return that youth to their program. Now, BCPs must provide trauma-informed case management, counseling, and in addition, referral services. And the shelter staff must contact the parent or legal guardian within 72 hours of entering the program. Now, once the youth leaves the shelter, once they exit, it is a requirement that BCP staff provide aftercare for a minimum of 90 days. The purpose of that is to ensure that the youth is still receiving any services they may need, or if they return home, maybe the family needs some additional counseling and you can connect them with those services. But the goal is to provide them with support for at least 90 days, and you can do it longer, and some do, just to ensure stability and success. Next slide, please. So additional components include using a trauma-informed approach that we discussed, having an outreach plan, gateway services that we discussed earlier, completing an assessment on the youth, engaging in harm reduction, usually with a safety plan, and then having a service coordination plan in place for referrals with community linkages, and then, of course, follow-up as we just discussed. Next slide, please. Services that are provided within a BCP naturally include not just shelter, but food, clothing, access to medical care, counseling. Once again, you must notify parents within 72 hours of entry, and then have a follow-up and aftercare exit plan established. Next slide, please. Now, in a Basic Center program, we talked about the youth being under the age of 18. Now, there is an exception for that. If your state requires, the only way you can have a shelter for youth is it requires you serve youth older than 17, then we do allow for that. Currently, the only state I'm aware of that has that requirement is the state of Maine. So we do have a shelter program in Maine that serves, I believe, up through 21, because that's the only license that the state of Maine issues for a youth shelter. Prevention services are also provided at least 3 months of aftercare, as we discussed. Sometimes prevention services are far better, where we can keep the youth at home when there's crisis or things occurring in the home that are unsafe. But if they do come into the shelter, once again, you must provide 3 months of aftercare. And then next slide, please. Okay, for TLP, probably because we have TLP and MGH, how about just in the chat, you can type TLP or MGH, depending on the program you received, or if you got both, put them both down. And as you can see from the history, TLPs were first awarded in 1990, and the purpose of the TLP and MGH programs is to help eligible runaway homeless youth move from homelessness to independence and self-sufficiency. Now, we've seen a variety of shelters under TLP and MGH. They could be a supervised apartment, it could be a host family home, or it could be a group home. We've seen a variety, and they all work depending on how well the program is actually operating. Next slide, please. TLP and MGH programs provide residential services to RHY eligible youth 16 to 21 years of age for up to 18 months. Now, as with the BCP program, TLP and MGH must have a capacity to serve at least 4, but not more than 20 youth in a single structure or building. Please keep in mind that the dependent children of the eligible RHY youth count towards that occupancy limit. Each youth must have their own transitional living plan, and they should be involved with the development of their own plan. Trauma-informed case management, counseling, and referral services are to be provided. And then for MGH programs, they must also provide parenting skills, child development training, child nutrition, and other maternity-related services to include connection with child care. Again, aftercare must be provided for a minimum of 90 days once the youth exits the program. Next slide, please. So in 2019, we actually released a separate FOA, funding opportunity announcement, for the maternity group home, instead of it just being part of the transitional living program. So in the additional requirements include that each youth and infant or child must have their own bed, and the facility must be sure that they're limiting the risk of injuries associated with falling, burning, electrical hazards, have a safe bath and tub space, etc. Now, also a separate file for the young person's infant or child must be maintained, and we want to be sure we're promoting positive parenting practices. And then lastly, ensure the youth receive consistent prenatal care, infants are getting well baby exams and immunizations. And then in addition, instruction and understanding healthy diets, meal planning, and grocery shopping for those young parents. Next slide, please. So eligible youth, as we discussed, for TLP and MGH programs are 16 through 21 years of age. Now, if you have a 21-year-old enter your program right before they turn 22, maybe it's the day before, you don't kick them out of the program when they turn 22. They can stay for the full 18 months. So that is something that changed a few years ago, and we're glad to see that change. So that helps be sure some stability for the youth so they have the opportunity to complete the program. The maternity group home, that is to be either provided on site with staff 24 hours a day or to have 24-hour-a-day call. So if you're using a supervised apartment complex, maybe you have staff that live in the complex or live nearby and they're on call and they respond to any emergencies or questions that come up. But the goal is they're to help those young parents, because they're raising children for the first time, and there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of need for support. So we want to make sure that your staff are nearby if they're not on site. And again, aftercare must be provided for at least 90 days after they exit the program. Next slide, please. So the project framework, as you can see from this slide, it's nothing earth-shattering here. Positive youth development, that's why you want to include the youth in development of their own individualized treatment plan. Be sure your staff are trained in trauma-informed care, and then be using evidence-informed or best practices in the delivery of your services. And make sure your services are developmentally and age-appropriate and, of course, culturally sensitive. We want to be sure we're protecting our youth from harassment. That means not just from staff, but from other youth. We must be trained on human trafficking. And then lastly, needs assessment, individual service planning, very important components of providing services to this population. Next slide, please. So the core competencies, program staff, within the funding opportunity announcement, there's a list of required training. And of course, that's just what's required. We hope you're doing additional trainings, but we expect that all the youth care workers, or all workers involved with the youth, are trained on the core competencies that are contained in the funding announcement. And they should be professional. They should be applying the youth development approach, cultural and human diversity, developmental practice methods that are proven, and then having good relationship and communication skills. And I believe that's the end of it. So we are open to questions.
Thanks, Keith. And that was a lot of information. Thanks for sharing all that. There was a few questions that came in, and we might not get to all of them. We're going to touch on at least a couple, and know that your questions in the end will all be answered. But one question for you, Keith, and whoever else on the team might want to answer is, when you talk about the definitions of homelessness, the question was, are these key definitions similar for SOP, BCP, TLP? Are they similar to the HUD definition of homelessness?
No, HUD in many states have slightly different definitions, and that's why we're always very careful to come out and be very honest about what our definitions are. I think that I've run these programs, RHY programs, I've run HUD programs, I've run state programs, and I found that this was probably the most simple and made the most sense to me as a grantee. You just think in terms of a runaway. That's a minor, someone under the age of 18, they left home and they did not have the permission of their parent or guardian. So that's a runaway. Homeless youth, for street outreach, 0 through 21 years of age. And then for TLP and NGH programs, it's 16 to 21 years of age. And once again, that runaway and homeless definition applies.
Great, thank you. Another question, and it's kind of a two-parter, is there was a question around using other funding to support youth in shelter. So you had talked about, like, you can continue to provide, we're not asking you to kick them out, but using this funding up to 21 days. So the questions were around that were to support youth in shelter beyond 21 days, do folks exit them in HMIS from the Basic Center program, for example, or do they exit them once they have left the shelter entirely? So once the 21 days is over and they're switching to a different funding source, do they need to exit the HMIS at that point, or wait till they're completely done with schools?
It's my understanding they exit after they leave, they exit them in RHYMIS after they exit the Basic Center program.
So if they're, so after the 21 days, they continue to provide the service? I'm sorry, go ahead, Risa.
So this is Risa. So I'll take that question. So the requirement is that after 21 days, you would switch that particular youth to a different funding stream. You keep them in HMIS. However, you work with your HMIS lead to make sure you set up your Basic Center shelter program so that you can then assign them to the new funding stream. And you only exit them from HMIS once they have left your Basic Center program altogether. So if it's a 60-day stay with 21 days under RHY funding, you exit them after the 60th day. And I think the reason we're asking for this information is to make the determination, how long do you stay in a Basic Center program? Right now, we're only funding up to 21 days, but if we have enough data to support making it longer, then I think we have that data to go to make the request for a longer stay in the Basic Center program. So I'm hoping that's helpful for whoever asked that question.
Thanks, Teresa. And if someone wants to follow up with that, again, keep dropping things in the chat because we will get to your questions, like I said, either live or following up afterwards. But keeping on that same theme about this question, similar to that question is, how do we demonstrate that we are using other funds to keep a child past the 21st day? What would be the expectation that you would need to prove that?
Okay, well, we don't really dictate too much into the weeds on how an agency performs some of these functions. So it could be that it's notated in the use file. It could be that in their own funding database that, you know, in their spreadsheets, that they're maintaining that separately. Generally, what I have seen is that it's notated in the use file, which is adequate. It's just showing that at this point they transition from Basic Center funding into United Way funding or some other unrestricted funding that the agency has available.
Great, thank you.
And then, of course, as Risa said, be sure and work with your local COC and make sure that you're noting that in your RHY HMIS reporting.
Great, thanks. I'm going to hand it back so they continue the presentation. Again, just a reminder, drop those questions in the chat box and we will continue to try to respond to them as we go. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a great pleasure. I will be handing this off to my colleague in Kansas City, Missouri. Erin Kelvington will be taking you into the post-award monitoring and support.
All right. Thanks, Keith. And thank you. Welcome to this, not just this presentation, but again, to serving the runaway and homeless youth populations in your community. We greatly appreciate the work that you're doing. What I'm going to cover is our post-award monitoring and support section. So you can go to the next slide. So we use a coordinated approach to oversight of the grant that you have received. So you'll see, you know, as we kind of talked about our mission, our focus and purpose and intent from our federal project officers is all about ensuring that you're going to be successful in walking out your grant. And so we can't do that alone, we being, you know, each of your federal project officers. And so we use a coordinated and approach to this, and I'll go through what some of that is. You would have received a welcome or introductory letter message sent from your federal project officer introducing who they were. That letter also included other key points of contact. One would have been regarding your grants management specialist. That's for the budget area of it, submitting your 425s and questions, you know, related to that. And then also the point of contact for your particular accountant liaison from the payment support office. And that's the drawdown and your actual account funds and things like that. So those points of contacts were there. That letter also had the contacts for each of the regional program managers and additional information regarding the setting up and what was coming forth. So that also included you know, our process of, again, kind of engagement and getting to know you if you're a first-time grantee. The purpose and reason why we do all that is, again, to ensure that you're able to successfully operate your program, that you're doing so within the confines of the requirements and mandates, to provide, again, support within the program assessment, collecting of any additional information on the status of activities, accomplishments. That's done through a formalized semi-annual report that you're submitting to us, and then we're, you know, providing that that report to Congress. And again, kind of as Risa kind of alluded to, that type of data and those reports all generate for us, you know, the purpose to be able to request for more funds or show the need, right, for that. So those are key to us in our ability to move forward and provide these funds for you on an annual basis. Okay, next slide. So there's three core areas regarding the program monitoring. It is a part of the process of evaluating your performance and business management performance. We do that through gathering various reports, audits, site visits, the performance reports that you're submitting in, any other sources of information that we may need or you're providing through us. And it requires that the federal project officers, again, develops that supportive working relationship with you, providing that guidance, training, connecting you to technical assistance, partnering you with other grantees that may have had similar difficulties or challenges that they overcame, connecting you to best practices and resources and things like that. The kind of initial or lowest level of monitoring is at the desk monitoring. Again, I'm not going to read through all of these. I'll give a little bit more specifics on that, but it's essentially the process where your FPO or our staff are reviewing the grant application, looking at the semi-annual reports, financial reports, and then also engaging with that you on a monthly basis as well. Next slide. So the bi-monthly contacts, that is a phone call that you're having with your federal project officer. We have those on a monthly basis. 1 month is an individual call, so it's just the FPO and the grantee on that call discussing and talking about current progress, standing up the program, perhaps any challenges and barriers to that, and then working with you as you progress through the 3-year grant. And then the other months, alternating that is what we call a regular group call. So that call would be with your federal project officer and their portfolio of grantees. It may be set up that it's per program, so you're on a call with all Basic Center program grantees in the region that that particular FPO is managing, or it could be all of the grantees that within that region that the FPO is monitoring. And then on-site monitoring is the actual visually and physical verifying and validating and assessing of the effectiveness of your program. Again, we have the black and white version in paper, but it's completely different when you're there and you're walking out what you've written out in an application. So it's really key and critical that we have that opportunity to be there on site and see your operations and have an opportunity again to further have discussions with you about how things are going, how we can be supportive in that in those areas where there may be some challenges, some difficulties, some programmatic elements that we can connect with and work on. And that also includes the process that we use as a peer monitor. So that's someone who is contracted through us that is a current grantee in that program, especially area. So they may be a grantee in California who's a case manager or a program director, and they've had years of experience with Basic Center program. And so they're joining us on that to offer that perspective. And we find a lot of great positive feedback and success in that type of model, to have not just the federal perspective, but to have someone who's currently working on those projects to be able to assist in the evaluation and support process. Next slide. So again, the purpose of the desk monitoring is to ensure that you're complying with the programmatic, administrative, and financial requirements, the reporting process, the data uploads, you're meeting your goals and your objectives. And we're coordinating with the Grants Management Office, again, to ensure that you're financial piece of this is going well as well. Certainly we want to ensure that you're able to spend the money, that if there's any changes or need for changes, that we're facilitating that process as well, so that you can submit any amendment to that process. That's what we're there for, is to support and promote that process. And then it also determines any needs for technical and training assistance and more in-depth monitoring and oversight as well. We're certainly not expecting you to just, once we give the money, to expect that everything's going to work well. I mean, we're in a pandemic, right? This year, we had no idea this was going to happen. So a lot of things have changed in that process of how you're doing business and how you're meeting those needs. And that's really critical, to be able to have that connection that we have with you, to real time, discuss those challenges and talk with you on that in that process. Next slide. So I already talked a little bit about the bi-monthly contacts. Again, it's to create those open lines of communication, to facilitate a supportive professional relationship directly with your federal project officer. I think we're pretty unique in that sense, that we have a really robust and great, strong network and team. And so, the ability of sending an email or even, talking with them ad hoc wise is pretty unique. You have a direct link to that person, and being responsive to your needs as they're occurring is really something that we pride ourselves on, with our staff being subject matter experts on the programs as well. Those regular scheduled calls, they last about 30 minutes. Again, we talked about the group and individual contacts. They're primarily for the executive director or program directors, but we also want staff, those that are frontline, youth care workers, youth advocate workers, case managers, to be engaged in those calls as well, to be as familiar as they can with the programming of it. It really does strengthen your overall operational effectiveness when staff are aware and very clear on what the purpose and intent of this program is, beyond just their job description. Once every 6 months, we want to have a focused conversation around the budget. Again, that's to ensure and to make sure that things are going, as planned with the expenditures. And should there be any issue, again, like I said, a need for amendments, a need to look at carrying over or extending no-cost extension requests at the end of a fiscal year, we're ahead of the game in being able to provide that support and ensure that the documents are submitted, the request is in time for that to be processed, so that you can continue to use those funds. And again, we're documenting these contacts and key discussion points. Next slide. On-site monitoring, we have a mandate, legislative mandate, that we are physically monitoring your programs at least once in a 3-year consecutive funding period. Again, the purposes are to review and ensure that compliance with grant requirements are occurring, to evaluate the program success, and then assist you with any additional support that you may need. We've chosen, again, as I said, a peer review model to conduct those. So we pair with a peer monitor. That's not always possible, but we try to do that the majority of the time, to have, like I said, a peer there to support that process and have a link so that you're able to ask questions directly to them, and they're able to provide you with some feedback on their experiences in overcoming perhaps a challenge. Next slide. Okay, so the visit is typically a minimum of 2 days. It does depend on the number of programs that you have. If your organization has more than one of our RHY funded programs, it may extend that additional day or two. And so, but we're there on site We're there interviewing staff. We're looking and talking with youth as well. Looking at the community partnerships that you have, organizations, governing body. We're reviewing those financial records, reviewing personnel files, youth files, and the policies and procedures. And then once we're done with that visit, and it's a very engaged visit, this isn't something where the auditor, we're not auditors. We're coming in and it's a very engaged and discussion based monitoring session. So it's not that we're just in a room and we're just looking at files and then we leave. We have a very robust, conversation about how things are going. We want to learn from you as well. That's how we've been able to make adjustments as we go through the years. 2 programs, 2 programming. It's what guides us in our training activities as well, to kind of be able to assess and determine whether or not any challenges or issues that are occurring, are they relative to just that and unique to just that program? Are they something that they're more systemic? Are they happening across, all basic center programs? Or are they across all of our programs? Those types of things help us as we go through. And they also help us to identify and capture best practices, which again is huge. We're in the business of ensuring and replicating those types of successes as well. And so these monitoring efforts help us gather that kind of information in detail. Once we're all done with the monitoring visit, we do provide you with a formal report that summarizes the visit. We have about 30 days after the last day of our visit to provide that report to you. It's very detailed. It outlines the key aspects of the program that we evaluated or programs that we evaluated. It aligns with the legislative and FOA citations and requirements. So it's not just, it isn't opinion based. Anything that we may be identified as a finding or compliance issue, it's well explained. And we talk about these things before we even leave your location as well. So nothing's going to be a surprise to you. We tend to have things already in play once we've left, as far as any work or supports that need to occur as well. And like I said, that's provided to you once we're done with that report, so that you can look at that and address the things that need to be addressed, as well as continue to strengthen and progress forward. Next slide. So some things that we've updated and improved as we've gone through this. Since 2017, we've really looked at this and how can we make this a better process? How can it benefit you all most? And then how can we really use this as a means for strengthening, like I said, our programs from the federal side as we move forward. So we took a very standardized approach to monitoring. It's not surprise. It's not that we just show up one day on your front door and say, hey, we're here to monitor you. There's a notification process. Again, you have that relationship with your federal project officer. So they're talking with you and letting you know that this is going to be the year that we're going to be coming out. And they work with you to plan and prepare for that visit. I spoke about that standardized monitoring report that we use. We also standardized our procedures for our staff so that it's similar across the board, again, in the process that we're doing. We have the monitoring components that we're looking at. We have a monitoring instrument that we use to facilitate the questions, and again, the various documents and sections of the program and operations that we need to cover. So that we have a robust and full picture of your organization and the progress that you're going through. And it's a living document as well. I said if there are things that we've identified, there are things that we're working with you on. It's not a one and done. The conversation is always ongoing, and we're working with you on what those improvements, if any, need to be as we go forward. Next slide. So I mentioned that on-site monitoring instrument that was developed again by and with our federal project officers. It enhanced that consistency and fairness in the review process. And again, our reports and our tool incorporates and guided by the citations and the legislative mandates that we have. And then we also incorporated a 360 evaluation that occurs. So you, after we're done with that visit, we provide you with an option or an opportunity to provide us feedback. We get feedback from the peer monitor, and the federal project also provides feedback on that. So that's how we get that robust evaluation. And again, we use that to help us as we move forward, to ensure that our staff are trained, to ensure that we're, have the most training out there, relevant and up to date for you all. And again, that the process is productive in being able to strengthen the overall federal programs that we have. Next slide. Monthly contact form. I spoke about the monthly calls that our federal project officers have with you. We document those things. Again, it's a living document for us. It helps, again, as a point of recording how things are going, what's key to that. We use that, some of those things as well. As we look at our programs, it's an opportunity for our staff, again, to be up to date with what's going on with each of the programs that they're responsible for. So it helps us track those emerging and promising practices and trends. It helps us, again, develop clear and consistent messaging. We talked about some of with the final rule that was initiated at the end of October 2017. That helped us, again, strengthen the purpose and intent of and refocus on the purpose and intent of Basic Center, our street outreach, our TLPs, and our MGH programs. It helped us strengthen terms and clarify those terms and definitions. And again, in doing that, that really helps us strengthen the process of accountability to those states and regulations. And it also helped us strengthen the FOA, the Federal Opportunities or Funding Opportunity Announcement and Review process, to strengthen that, clarify some things in the document. Again, to just strengthen overall our programs and enabling you to be successful in the operations of those programs. Okay, I will pause there. That's the last slide for me. So Christy, are there any questions in the queue that we have time to answer?
Hey, Aaron, I think we did get a lot of really great questions. So keep them coming. Like I said, we'll answer a couple now and keep moving, but we will get back to you. Also, we're going to be dropping in the chat a PDF of this presentation. We'll also send it to you all afterwards, but just so you have that. Aaron, for you, how will COVID be impacted how will COVID impact on-site monitoring? Reviews will be desk-based, or will they be in person? Is there a sense of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are in the process of developing a virtual platform, a virtual resource to do a policy and procedures to do a virtual site visit in this era of no travel and COVID. So there will be more to come on that, but we are right now looking at developing that, what the virtual platform would be. How does that change, some of the dynamics of the virtual or the on-site monitoring visit. So yeah, we are not going to be doing, we haven't done any, I can say we haven't done any this year. We were able to do about 4 before March, and the pandemic, hit us really hard. So that is something that we're looking at. And like I said, we're developing, and we'll be talking more about that here later. Thanks.
Great, Aaron. And then another, I think it's a quick question. For the Basic Center program, are consent forms needed for young people from the legal guardians in order to access services, to be enrolled in services? Or is it required?
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on this. My understanding is that it is state, from state to state. Some states, depending upon the age of the youth, they can sign in themselves. Others, they need that guardian, adult, parent or guardian to sign them in, and others don't require any type of signature in that initial first 24 to 48 hours until they can contact someone. So it just really depends. I don't know, Chris, do you have more to offer? Anyone else?
Sure. I mean, I just want to bring everyone's attention back to the definitions that we covered for the Basic Center program. And by law, someone who is a runaway has left without permission if they're under the age of 18. So I think there's a obligation on the part of the Basic Center program to provide the most life-saving services, i.e. shelter, food, anything beyond that, that's really going to fall into the realm of what the state licensing or the local licensing requires in terms of permission. But if a young person who's 16 years old shows up at your doorstep and they said they've run away or they've otherwise been kicked out of the home, you have the obligation to provide them that service. Now, it gets more complicated if you determine that they've run from child welfare, or if they're a juvenile justice youth, or in fact, they're under some other formal status. But the most immediate response is you have to provide them that care to keep them safe while you're making the determination about what their legal status is.
Yeah, and I would add that documentation is key. So making sure that you're documenting the circumstances that led that youth to your front door, and what services and what you provided for them. That's a key essential. Again, if it becomes known that they ran away from a juvenile detention center or they are under state's care, then you have that documentation to show when that happened, when that occurred, when you found out why they were there, the eligibility, and to be able to serve them up there. But certainly we don't want any youth turned away in the moment of their greatest need.
Great, thank you. I think, again, keep those questions coming. We'll track those. Hand it right back. I think, Chris, you take the next slide.
I am, thank you. So we're going to take just a few minutes to talk about outcomes, and this is really all linked to Aaron's presentation with respect to performance and monitoring, because there are linkages in your funding documents that say you're required to submit to us information on your performance. That data is submitted in one or two ways. It's either submitted through the progress reports, the PPR as it's called, or through RHYMAS. And we're going to talk just briefly about what outcomes look like, and we'll certainly talk a little bit about RHY, HMIS, the RHYMAS system, and then we're going to hand it off to Jeff to talk about some additional resources before we show you a video around the Office of Grants Management. If we can go ahead to the next slide, please. So we talked a while back, early on in the slide deck, about the performance standards that were required out of the 2008 reauthorization. We issued new program rules, program regulations in 2017, and we developed a set of standards based on what we call the 4 core outcome areas, and that is safe and stable housing, employment and education, social and emotional well-being, as well as permanent connections. Now, these 4 core areas, or these 4 core outcome areas, are linked specifically to the Transitional Living Program, Maternity Group Homes, and Basic Center. They are not directly linked to the Street Outreach Program. And I would encourage you to go back and take a look at the regulations, the RHY rule, if you haven't had a chance to do that. I know it can be a little dense, but it's important information for you to read to get a good sense of what's covered by the regulations and what's not. So development of these standards in 2017. You can go to the next slide. We did create measures for each of the programs. Now, like I said, street outreach isn't linked to the 4 core areas. There are only 2 performance standards for street outreach. One deals with essentially a ratio of contacts to engagement. And what we're looking to see in this, this measure is the strategy you're using to engage young people successful enough that at least 33% of the contacts that you have move to a case plan. So for every 10 young people that you come in contact with on the street, you know, roughly 3 to 4 of them, you've imparted with them the need to develop a case plan, and they've agreed to do so. And then the other one, which, as I mentioned, is measured through the performance progress report, is really about having contact with youth that is reasonable to the size of the organization and to the population of young people that you're providing services to in your region. And you report that one through the PPR. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Excuse me. For VCP, again, reflecting back onto those 4 core outcome areas, we are wanting to see evidence that you're providing counseling services, that youth are in fact taking advantage of those services, that you're giving them access to home-based services in for prevention, or if you're doing the optional drug and alcohol or requests for STD testing, that those are being conveyed in your reports. Most importantly, we want to make sure that youth are leaving safely, wherever that may be too. It could be back home, it could be to another program, it could be to a residential treatment center, it could be that they've aged out and they're no longer under the BCP umbrella. But we want to make sure that you are reporting numbers through your RHYMIS data collection that demonstrates, in fact, that youth that are coming through your program are leaving in a safe and appropriate way. They're exiting to a safe and appropriate environment. Safe and appropriate environment. Next slide, please. And we've got a couple of slides here that are really dense, so I'm certainly not going to read through these. I would say that all of this information is conveyed in your in the funding opportunity announcement. It's also available in this slide deck if you've downloaded it. So I certainly encourage you to take a look at it. And you should have a good sense of these measures when you're looking at your RHYMIS data and the data standard information that's available for you when you enter into that relationship with your COC. Next slide, please. Similar to Basic Center program, we have an enhanced set of standards that are really dealing with youth achieving success in certain areas, whether that's job skills, whether that's work, whether or not they're getting healthcare referrals, mental health or behavioral health or physical health. Certainly with respects to maternity group homes, we want to track and we want to learn from you what you're doing with respects to prenatal care and well baby exams, making sure that those records are reported so that we can ensure that the infants and young children who are part of the program are getting the services that they need. And once again, that exit, what does it look like when the young person is leaving after 18 months from a transitional living program? Are they going to a safe place? Whether that's on their own in their own apartment and moving in with someone, they've left for to go back home with a family member, whatever that may be. Next slide, please. And similarly to the Basic Center program, there's a list of corresponding measures that we will draw from the RHYMIS and PPR data that you submit to us. But it's important for you to track your success, specifically when we have percentage values here that you're in fact meeting those targets. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about Runaway and Homeless Youth Management Information System, and I'm sensitive to time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next couple of slides because we want to make sure that we get into the grants management presentation before we're scheduled to wrap up at 5 o'clock. But you should have all noted in the funding opportunity announcement that you are obligated to enter into a relationship with a local COC, excuse me, the HUD continuum of care, specifically for the purposes of gaining access to that local vendor who will supply you the RHY or the HMIS system. In it is a specifically designed subset of questions that are for RHY providers. You know, we're putting it on your shoulders that you're going to be collecting that data as young people come in, that you're going to collect accurate information, you're going to maintain the records that you need to maintain in order to supply us that data as required for the grant. Next slide, please. So we do data collection specifically through HMIS. All 4 programs have data entry components in the system. For DCP, you're recording information on all youth that you've served, including those that received services from outside the shelter. And I saw in the chat there was a little bit of confusion about what prevention looks like versus providing shelter. If in fact you have provided counseling services to a young person and you have prevented them from taking a bed in your shelter, those are prevention services, and you would record that as such in RHYMIS. Once they are admitted into your shelter, that becomes shelter stay. Even if it's for overnight or if it's 21 days, that is considered shelter stay for the purposes of RHYMIS. And once they've been released from shelter stay, so that's a condition of being in a bed under the control of your shelter staff. Once they're released, then they exit into an aftercare situation. I would encourage you, if you're unclear about that, to make sure that you take a look at the data standards, have conversations with your federal project officers to get the clarification that you need. And if you have questions about what you need to set up your local project, you know, go to the URL that's listed here, have that conversation with your local HMIS lead so that you can get the guidance you need in order to set up your data collection system appropriately. And you are ultimately responsible for covering the costs of this, and it's one of the things that we've asked you provide in your applications, that you either have the funding or you have the systems in place to be able to collect the data. Next slide, please. We changed our contractor about a year ago. We typically do 2 uploads, one in the spring and one in the fall. That may change depending on how this current upload process is going. For those of you who are current RHY grantees, you know that the upload is scheduled to go through the 16th, through next Monday. And we're going to be working with our new contractor to make decisions going into the next fiscal year to determine whether or not the fiscal year 2021 data collection is going to follow the same pattern that it has. So please stay tuned for those facts. By all means, talk to your FPOs, talk to RHYTTAC, and there's also, on the next slide, please, some information about who you would need to contact in the event that you have questions or you're running into challenges. But definitely take a look at these links, the FAQs on the RHYTTAC website, and be sure to visit the HUD Exchange, where there's a fair amount of resources related to the RHY program, RHYMIS specific manual. Next slide, please. Oh, and I see that they're putting links in the chat for this. And then finally, if you're not familiar with the performance progress reports, there is information on the Family and Youth Services Bureau website that talks specifically about what the performance progress report looks like, you can certainly go through your federal project officer, or you can go through the Office of Grants Management Specialists. Those get uploaded into the grant management system, Grant Solutions, on a biannual basis. Next slide, please. All right, so Kristen, I don't know how we're doing in terms of time, if we want to pause for a question or if we want to move into the next section. You're in charge.
Oh, I'll take that. I think, Chris, if we could go ahead and move on hand it off to Jeff, and then we will still at the end be able to go back and go through a lot of these questions. Just to make
Great, thank you. All right. So we'll pass this off to Mr. Jeff Daniels, who's going to take you through some resources. Sir?
Yeah, can you hear me, Chris? Are we good? Okay, great. So I want to talk about some resources today. And I know that many of you have asked several questions in the chat, and believe it or not, these resources are designed for you. I think you'll find them very helpful, and we just kind of wanted to give you an overview of some of the bigger resources that are available to you. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the Managing Federal Grants Tip Sheet. This will answer a lot of questions for you regarding the management of your grant, things such as no-cost extensions, budget modifications, carryovers, even your, as Chris had mentioned earlier, your performance progress report forms. So these resources, be it web-based, are very helpful. And I want to mention one thing overall. Your federal project officer is one of your greatest resources, obviously, but just wanted to provide you with these. These are all really real-time, 24/7 available to you. Next slide, please. So we start with the FSBE website. You can see in this particular slide, we have our programs down over to the left, and that will define those programs, give you certain definitions. But the blue bar running across with the white wording in the middle of this slide, really, those are links to more questions you may have, definitions, some of the FAQs and resources that are available. We've tried to categorize them, as you can see there, with help for families, programs, grants, resources, and FAQs. So this slide is a really good slide in understanding our programs, finding resources, and answering some of your questions. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to show you this slide real quick to kind of give you the territorial breakout jurisdictions. We talked about the region FPOs. We have 10 regions in FSBE, really. And so these are the 10. It starts with Region 1 in the east, which you can see there is the dark blue, and as mentioned earlier, in Boston. We go to Region 2, which is in New York and covers those states in maroon. Region 3 in Philadelphia, you see those 3 states. Region 4 headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. That's the southeastern piece there. Region 5 in the brown, headquartered in Chicago. Region 6 is headquartered in Dallas. That's the green. Those are the green states there. Region 7 in Kansas City, Missouri, the gray. Region 8 in Denver, Colorado. Again, I'm just saying where the federal offices are, but you see those states for Region 8 there, and I guess that would be aqua. Region 9 in San Francisco, California, with the 3 states there. It's hard to see, but Hawaii is included in Region 9, along with America Samoa and Guam and a few other territories in the Pacific. And then we rounded out with Region 10, which is in Seattle, Washington, and you see the purple states there, along with Alaska. Next slide, please. So one of the other resources that we have, you may or may not be familiar with, is the National Runaway Safe Line. You can see there the excuse me, the website, the www.1800runaway.org. Not only is this for youth and teens, but this also is for parents and guardians that may have questions as well. As we know, many of them have those questions, and this is a great resource you can guide them to if you wanted to, if parents or guardians had any questions as well. Next slide. So we have the RHY National Communication System, of course, the National Runaway Safe Line. You can see here, and of course, you're going to get these slides. You can see that the Section 331 of the Act does provide authority to award grants for a national communication system, really assisting runaway and homeless youth when communicating with their families and service providers. You can see this is available 24 hours, 365, so it's always open, so to speak. Just going down the slide here. One thing I do want to point out that I think is very useful is they do provide access to transportation services for the youth home when it's appropriate, or to shelters, counseling, medical assistance, and other vital services. So for instance, I know that they provided Greyhound trips for youth to go home or to go to a safe place. So very good resource here, lots to offer, and just wanted to give you some familiarization with this particular, our national communication system. Next slide. Continuing on, here are some other things that they do that you may or may not be aware of. I mentioned earlier the providing family and guardians with advice and referrals. They definitely deliver crisis intervention to youth and or families 365, 24/7. So if a youth calls in that's in crisis, they're going to address that issue and try to do whatever they can to provide a safety measure for that youth. So very good resource here. A few other things that you can see: provide prevention counseling, maintain a database. They do keep track of every call that does come in. They also conduct outreach to vulnerable youth and underserved populations, their families and communities. Next slide. So we'll pause here and just want to talk about the Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. I know many of you may be familiar with it. We refer to it as RHYTTAC. Very, very good resource. You can see what the goals of RHYTTAC are there: deliver a comprehensive array of technical assistance training. That is true for you as the grantees, no doubt. We want to enhance public awareness. They do support service innovation. You can see these things: expand the capacity of runaway and homeless youth programs, develop and enhance intervention and prevention strategies, and engage institutions to assist with the development of systemic improvements and responses to runaway and homeless youth. That's the slide. You're going to get these, but just want to share with you, RHYTTAC, what their goals are. Next slide. Continuing on with the goals here, you can see certain things that they do. I'll highlight some things: employ positive youth development. They expand the capacity of programs, really addressing the needs of victims and survivors of human trafficking. They want to lead and contribute to information gathering related to runaway and homeless youth prevention or intervention. And finally, build and contribute to an evidence-based for services, programs, and strategies for RHY intervention and prevention. I want to mention this. If you take away one thing, RHYTTAC has an excellent website. I've been watching the chat box, several questions. We have an 84 FAQ list that's on the RHYTTAC website, 84 questions. Certain questions like, how is outreach defined? The definition of aftercare, the clear definition of prevention, how is respite defined? 84 questions. So I would recommend that you take a look at that document. Many of the questions that you've asked are actually in that document already answered. So very good resource for you there. We worked hard on those 84 questions. Got those questions really from the grantees and put those together. These were we definitely had many more, but these were certainly the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, which we see are being asked through this training. Next slide, please. So here are your RHYTTAC services. There it is, the RHYTTAC website. That'll get you to the, if you go down, you'll see where it says the FAQs on a drop down when you go into the RHYTTAC services support website. There's also a community of practice area. There's a guidebook on community practice. And then, of course, they have an entire e-learning platform that talks about different aspects of this scope of work that I think you'll find very helpful, not only for you, but your staff. Again, great resource. Don't be afraid to reach out to your FPO and ask questions as well. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the National Clearinghouse on Homeless Youth and Families. Again, you can see the blue bar there going across. It'll talk about and help you understand what the NCHYF, National Clearinghouse on Youth or Homeless Youth and Families is. There are some research summaries on here, some of our RHY partners, just a true wealth of information on this particular site. So I recommend that you become familiar with these resources. Hopefully they'll be helpful to you in serving youth. And again, don't be afraid to ask your FPO any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So having said that, what I want to do is, that's my portion. We're going to play a video here for you. It's by our grants management officer, Katrina Morgan. I did not see her on as a participant, but she recorded this video for you. And it's going to talk a little bit more. We're transitioning over into sort of the grants management piece. So without further ado, I'll ask to cue up the video.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ACF Runaway and Homeless Youth Grants Program. My name is Katrina Morgan, and I am the Grants Management Officer, whose team will provide you with direct technical assistance and oversight related to the business and financial aspects of your grant projects. Within the Office of Grants Management, which I will call OGM for the rest of the presentation, there are 7 distinct portfolio divisions that handle different grant programs grouped based on program purpose and type of assistance. The RHY grants fall within our Family Protection and Resilience grants portfolio. Janice Davis Caldwell is our director, and I am one of the grants management officers within the portfolio. You will see, if you haven't already, my electronic signature on all of your notices of award related to your grant. Our team is also made up of a number of grants management specialists who will act as your main points of contact for any questions or other issues that arise during your grant project period. Today, I will be providing an overview of the roles and responsibilities of OGM and how we work together with your program office, FSBE, to administer your grants. In addition to roles, I'll also provide information about federal policies related to the use of grant funds, a brief overview of the Grant Solutions electronic system, and a discussion of how the Division of Payment Management fits into the grants policy or process. I'll also touch on reporting requirements for this program and discuss some of the types of award actions that will likely be necessary during the life of your project, including various post-award amendments, as well as the non-competing continuation award process. Finally, I'll touch on some recurring themes that often lead to questions for our grantees in the hopes of helping you avoid any pitfalls or difficulties that we've learned lessons from over the years. As I mentioned earlier, OGM and FSBE jointly administer the RHY grants. We have different areas of responsibility and expertise, and our roles are intended to be distinct and complementary. Of course, there will be times when a question arises that contains both programmatic and budgetary or business implications. And in those cases, OGM and FSBE work together to reach a solution that satisfies both the requirements of the RHY program as well as the grant's rules and regulations. OGM has the primary responsibility for overseeing the business and other non-programmatic areas of the grant award and administration. We monitor and guarantee the integrity of the competitive award process. We ensure compliance with all applicable laws, regulations, policies, and procedures that apply to the award and monitoring of federal grant funds. OGM, and more specifically your assigned grants management specialist, reviews the SF 425 federal financial reports to periodically monitor the financial status of your project. And while the grant solution system may be accessed by all relevant stakeholders, including OGM, FSBE, and grantee organizations, OGM still technically serves as the official receipt point for all correspondence related to your grant. So when do you contact us? You should contact OGM anytime you have questions about how to request an amendment to your approved grant application. You may also learn via the remarks section of your notice of award that ACF requires additional or revised documents to resolve funding restrictions or other application deficits. And as a quick aside, I highly recommend paying close attention to those remarks on your notices of award. Remarks are a very important source of information regarding terms and conditions and other award requirements. And I know it's very small text that it kind of might fade into the background, but it's really important to read through that whole section. Your grant specialist will be able to help clarify any budget issues, particularly concerning whether particular costs are allowable under the federal cost principles. And of course, if you ever have questions about or require technical assistance in submitting your financial status reports, please contact your grants management specialist. There are a few key sources of policy guidance for the use of federal grant funds that I'd like to highlight today. 45 CFR Part 75 contains the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for HHS awards. And that's the Department of Health and Human Services, our sort of mother department over ACF. The CFR is available online in its entirety. Subpart D covers post-federal award requirements, including information about revisions to projects, expectations for grantee management systems, corrective actions for failure to comply with federal regulations, as well as a host of other topics. Subpart E contains the cost principles, including specific information on the allowability of a long list of specific types of expenditures. Subpart F outlines audit requirements for grantees receiving federal funds. So much like I said about the remarks section or your notices of award, it is very important to take a look at 45 CFR Part 75 and become familiar with it. It is long, obviously, but it's a good idea to read through it. The HHS Grants Policy Statement provides a set of general terms and conditions for all HHS discretionary grants and cooperative agreements. The GPS is also available online. I recommend becoming familiar with the full GPS document, but please pay particular attention to Part 2, which contains the grant terms and conditions. Many questions regarding the types of revisions that are allowed and how to handle requesting those changes, among a lot of other important information, can be answered by the GPS. Grant Solutions is going to be very important to you throughout the life of your grant. Grant Solutions is our online grants administration system, and it contains the official grant file for your grants. The system allows OGM, FSB, and grantees to add information and conduct some communication regarding your grant projects within the system. Grantees will find all notices of award for a particular grant number here, and you will also find application kits for the submission of post-award amendments and non-competing continuations available here. OGM is responsible for ensuring that your key personnel, namely an authorized official and a project director, have access to the system and the ability to submit documents. You may also request read-only access for other individuals within your organization. If you'd like to do so, please contact your grants management specialist with any questions regarding that user access. Okay, moving on to the Division of Payment Management. DPM provides a payment and accounting system for all ACF grants. The DPM payment management system is where you'll go to debit grant funds as you need them to pay for approved project activities. In addition to drawing down grant funds, you'll also complete all financial reporting in this system. The SF 425 cash transaction report, which is sort of what we refer to as the PMS required report, is required quarterly by DPM to reconcile the debits that have been made to reporting of grant expenditures during that quarter. The SF 425 Federal Financial Report, which is the report we are looking at more closely in OGM, is required semi-annually by ACF to monitor the financial status of your project. DPM is housed in the HHS Program Support Center, which is a separate operating division from ACF. So while we can act as a liaison for resolving certain problems or getting you in contact with the right person at DPM, we don't have direct control over DPM operations. As I've already mentioned, the SF 425 Federal Financial Report is due semi-annually and must be submitted in the payment management system. Your grants management specialist will be responsible for review and acceptance of your FFR. Semi-annual reports are due 30 days after the end of a reporting period, and a final cumulative FFR is also due 90 days after the budget period end date. Any disbursements you reported on the final cumulative FFR should match the cash cash draws you've reported on your corresponding quarterly cash transaction reports. Any discrepancy between reported disbursements and actual cash withdrawn must be corrected as soon as possible. Failure to reconcile the two totals can cause long-lasting effects, such as an apparent federal debt on your account if they're not resolved. And obviously, we'd like to avoid those kinds of problems if we can on all sides. The SF 428 report is used to report on tangible personal property, which is equipment or supplies with a unit value of greater than $5,000 and a useful life of greater than a year. This type of equipment will require disposition instructions at the end of your grant project. The SF 429 is used to report on real property. The purchase or improvement of real property is not allowed under the RHY program, so you shouldn't have any need to utilize this report. And it's also highly possible, if not highly likely, that the SF 428 report does not apply to your project either if you don't have that tangible equipment or personal property. But if you do have that situation with your grant, that SF 428 would be due at the end of the project period. So again, those two reports don't really apply significantly to the RHY programs, but I just want to make you aware of them in case you have any need of them. Okay, so much like the federal financial reporting, program progress reports are due semi-annually. Please follow the guidance you've received from FSBE on completing your PPRs, and you will submit completed reports via the Grants Notes function in Grant Solutions. Okay, so moving on to post-award amendments now. If you find that you need to request an amendment to your original project plan, you'll need to submit an amendment request via Grant Solutions. Prior approval is required anytime you need to significantly adjust your budget across cost categories, or when there are changes in key personnel, such as the authorized official or program director, when there is a need for a change in the scope of your planned project, if you find that you have unmet objectives or incomplete activities from the previous budget period that require a carryover of funds, or if you find the need for a no-cost extension to complete previously approved project activities at the end of your project period. Each amendment type is available for selection in Grant Solutions, where you'll be then directed to the application components necessary to request the amendment. So please don't hesitate to contact your grants management specialist anytime you have questions about whether an amendment is necessary or how to request one. Each budget period of your grant after this first year will require the submission of a non-competing continuation application. So FSBE will send out invitation letters soon that will include instructions for applying and the expected funding levels for the next year. There will be a distinct NCC kit for you to access in Grant Solutions with guidance on the types of documentation to submit. The NCC application is sort of similar to the original application that you submitted, a little simpler. It's pared down a little bit. So as always, please contact OGM for assistance with any problems you encounter during the application process. Okay, now I'd like to start sharing some lessons learned that will hopefully be helpful to you as you start out your new grant projects. Financial management standards and internal controls are very important, given that ACF expects grantee organizations to be adequately and accurately tracking the expenditure of grant funds and the completion of project activities. Guidance on standards regarding financial management can be found in 45 CFR Part 75.302 and 75.303. So the expectation is that grantees will spend funds as budgeted in the most recently approved application. And failure to do so could result in corrective actions such as restriction or even a disallowance of funds. So it is very important to communicate any intended changes to your federal project officer and grants management specialist to ensure that prior approval is granted where necessary. And, you know, we all recognize that there are times when you have to make certain adjustments to your original project plan, And as long as you have consulted with the federal staff and received the appropriate approvals to do so, there's generally no problem. I also want to note that any change in the allocation of indirect costs to your budget should be communicated to OGM, even if the change is still in compliance with your approved indirect cost rate agreement. Since we do break out the indirect costs as a line item on your notices of award, we want to make sure that that is consistent with how you're actually expending those indirect costs. I talked a bit earlier about the payment management system, but I want to stress again the importance of resolving those financial discrepancies, if you have them, between reported disbursements, which comes from the information you submit via your cash transaction reports, and actual cash withdrawn as quickly as possible. So these discrepancies are often translated by DPM as a federal debt on your account and can be very difficult to resolve if too much time elapses. An additional but related point is that you should not continue drawing down funds from a previous budget period for activities that are completed in the current budget period if you have not received a formal carryover. What happens is when we do a formal carryover, you receive a new notice of award, which transfers authorized funds from the previous budget period to the next budget period. I think sometimes the inclination on the grantee's part may be to zero out one budget period before touching the next. But that's not the way we do business, and it can cause major problems if we don't resolve it right away. Okay, I realize I've covered a lot of information in a short period of time here, but please know that if you have any questions about the role of OGM or have any specific needs surrounding your grant projects, I'd highly encourage you to contact me or your assigned grants management specialist. There's a list here on this slide of contact information, and you should have received information about who your specific grants management specialist is on the board. But if there are any questions, please reach out directly to me. Thank you for your time and congratulations on your new awards.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. We've got about 7 minutes left. I want to say thank you to the 181 participants that have hung in for the 1 hour and 53 minutes that we're into this. I know that there were a number of questions that were popping up during the video, and there were some other questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. We are going to take a couple of questions as we wrap up here, but yeah, I have great news for you all. There are more opportunities for you to learn from the fabulous federal project officers and the managers that are here to help you, as well as Katrina Morgan, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us today, but she will be with us next Monday, not next Monday, on Monday, November 16th, during the National Grantees training. So I'm going to pause there before that, before I give any more details about that, and see if Kristen wants to throw out any questions that we can try to answer now before we start wrapping up. And then I'll give you some more details about what's to come here in a couple of weeks at the national training.
Yes, and stick around, folks, for that plug for the national training. We want to make sure that you get that information. Chris, there's just a couple of quick questions to throw your way. One was around, I think it was during the section on monitoring, there was a question around monthly contact forms. Is that something that grantees, is there a template for that the grantees have? Is there anything particular they're supposed to use for that?
Great question, and I will ask, oh, Aaron just keyed in. Look at that. That was like we were in symbiotic.
Yeah, that's actually a form that the federal project officers use. So that's the format that's internal, that they document the calls so that we have a running record of what's going on with y'all. So that's not something the grantee is responsible for.
Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Great, thanks, Aaron.
The next question was if, and this is, I think it came up during the performance standards slide, or specific around BCP. There was a clarification on what we mean by, or what you mean by counseling services. Would that be us like behavioral health services? What would fall into a counseling?
Sure. So we're expecting that a full spectrum of services are being provided, particularly for a youth who's going to be in the Basic Center program for an extended period of time. Obviously, if they're just there overnight or just a short stay, that's going to limit the amount of services that they are provided the opportunity to participate in. But if you have group sessions, if you have individual counseling, if you have family counseling, certainly we want you to capture that information as part of your reporting. Similarly, if you're making referrals for other health services, whether they're medical, mental, behavioral health services, we want you to capture that information as well. So it covers a wide spectrum of services that you might provide, or either directly or through referral, but all of them are critically important for us to know about, and making note of each one of those instances is part of the reporting process.
Great. Those are the questions that we've had pretty much outstanding. I know there was people answering questions as we went, and if we will check all of that. If there's anything missing, we'll make sure we get that information out to folks on one of those frequently asked question documents. So.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Can we move to the next slide? All right. So here it is. Here's your next opportunity. Not only is this our advertisement for the National Grantees Training, if you have not already registered, please do so. Send out this information widely to your peers, to your colleagues. We encourage you to send it out to your networks in your communities. This is free. There are going to be great opportunities for plenary sessions and individual workshops. Because it's virtual, there's literally no capacity limit. There probably is, but we don't anticipate 25,000 people logging on at the same time. But we want to make sure that as many people as possible participate in this event, and we encourage you to disseminate the information widely as well as register yourself. Now, specific to other questions that you may have, on November 16th at 1 o'clock, just wanted to make sure that I had that correctly on my notes, 1 o'clock Eastern, we're going to hold a new grantee orientation question and answer session. So it'll be myself, it'll be my colleagues, Aaron, Jeff, Keith, possibly some other representatives from FSBE. We'll do a very quick run through of the slide deck again, just for familiarization purposes. But the bulk of that time slot is really just going to be dedicated to answering questions. We find that folks are eager just to have an opportunity to pick our brains. And so we set the session up specifically for that purpose. Now, if there are 200, 300, 400 people in the room, obviously we're going to do our best to catalog questions of certain types and answer them the best we can. But I would encourage you to come join us on the 16th at 1 o'clock. Immediately following that, Katrina Morgan, whose voice you heard in the recorded video, or the video, is going to be available to ask questions specifically around grants management. So she wasn't able to join us today, but she will be there in person to answer questions from anyone interested. And this isn't just related to new grantees. If you've been around for a while and you still have a question about managing grants, Katrina will be available for that as well. There is always the opportunity to send questions directly to your federal project officers. You have contact information for them in this presentation if you've not already heard from them. I did see one or two people mention that they hadn't received a letter yet. So if you have some sense of what region you're in, reach out to that regional program manager or to that federal project officer in that region, and we'll make sure that we get you connected with the right person. With that, I do want to appreciate everybody that stuck it out through these last 2 hours. Thank you to my colleagues, Jeff, Aaron, and Keith. Thank you to Risa for joining us and answering a few questions. She's always has great wisdom to pass on. I want to acknowledge that many of our federal project officers have been on this call, and they have been hearing the same information that you've been hearing throughout the past 2 hours. And I know that Debbie Powell was listening into the presentation as well. So thank you, Debbie, for joining us. And then lastly, thanks to RHYTTAC for coordinating. We appreciate everyone's time, and we look forward to working with you in the years to come. Kristen, any housekeeping items that we need to wrap up with?
I don't think so, Chris. Just as a reminder, we will send out after this to everybody that registered the PowerPoint slides that were also posted, so you have access to those and links to where these are housed on the RHYTTAC website, so you can share with those that you would like to make sure gets this information as well. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you at the national training.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.